U.S. President Donald Trump is once again the disruptor at a G7 summit in Canada. He's also once again muddied the outlook on Canada-U.S. trade. Trump has left the summit a day early, but apparently on good terms with Prime Minister Mark Carney.
President, any statement on why you're leaving the G7 early for Washington?
Well, I have to be back. Very important. I want to just thank our great host. You did a fantastic job. Thank you. In Canada. But you probably see what I see, and I have to be back as soon as I can.
I'm very grateful for the President's presence, his contributions,
Are you going to have a communique on Iran?
And I fully understand why.
We'll see you on the plane.
Return.
Trump and Prime Minister Carney spoke to reporters there after posing for the G7 family photo. The U.S. president didn't elaborate on why he was leaving the summit, but the White House says it's because of the situation in the Middle East. And we'll bring you more on that in just a few minutes. But first, we want you to hear Trump's comments just hours after leaving the summit, which are casting doubt on new progress in trade talks between Canada and the U.S. The Prime Minister's office announced yesterday there could be a trade and security deal in place in just 30 days. But here's what Trump said on Air Force One overnight in response to a reporter's question about making Canada the 51st state.
I think it's a much better deal from Canada, but, it's up to them. They're going to have to pay a lot of tariffs and things. They're going to have to pay a lot of money for the dome, for the Iron Dome. They want to be a part of it. We may make a separate deal on that, by the way. We discussed that, with the dome. That may be a separate deal. They want to be at $71 billion. They're going to pay.
There could be a dome thing separate from the tariff.
They'll be in the dome. Yeah, they'll be under the dome.
Trump mistakenly referring there to the Iron Dome, apparently meaning instead his proposed Golden Dome missile defense plan. It remains to be seen what any of those remarks will actually mean for a potential trade deal. But let's explore that a little bit more with Janice McGregor, who is covering the G7 summit, part of the CBC News team in Alberta, and she is live at the Media Center in Banff, just up the road in Banff from Kananaskis. It sounded yesterday in that PMO statement, Janice, that there was progress on trade with that potential deal just 30 days away, and then Trump's comments on Air Force One overnight. Can you decipher that for us?
Bear with me while I try to make some order out of this disorder. And I should say that, of course, it's very early here on the ground in the Rockies. Canadian officials have yet to respond to our requests for some kind of a statement reflecting on what was said on Air Force One that would allow us to assess the potential injury from the whiplash that people might be feeling after yesterday. You saw those very positive, laudatory comments about the summit, Trump seeming to almost be apologizing for having to leave because, he had enjoyed his time. And of course, we had optimistic comments from Canadian officials after the bilateral conversation with Donald Trump, this talk of progress, allowing them to accelerate, perhaps, set this 30-day deadline, a reflection of perhaps some optimism, some momentum coming out of this. Kirsten Hillman, Canada's ambassador in Washington, said on Power and Politics last night, still firm, that this agreement they were pursuing would be something that would see an end to the harm that Donald Trump's tariff policy was doing to Canada's economy in exchange for, as Mark Carney has proposed, this new security partnership. But going by the president's comments there on Air Force One, he doesn't sound like someone who has any intention of giving up that tariff hammer, right? It went on after the tape you played to talk about how his tariffs are bringing in $88 billion in revenue for the U.S. government. I should remind people that those are tariffs that are paid by American businesses, American consumers, but he believes everything is working here. And so in the cold light of day, does this 30-day deadline now look like perhaps a countdown to a point where the Carney government is going to have to say to its domestic stakeholders, okay, I guess it's time now to retaliate ourselves if they are not, in fact, likely to convince Donald Trump himself that these tariffs should or could be lifted. We should also note that that 30-day deadline is after the July 8th deadline that Trump himself has set to have deals with all sorts of countries all around the world in response to his so-called reciprocal tariff play, including some leaders who are here in Kananaskis hoping to maybe get some FaceTime with Donald Trump in and around their expanded conversations with G7 leaders today. Those include Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, who was to have had her own bilateral conversation with Trump, is now being stood up on that. She will be in a bilateral conversation with Mark Carney. Certainly these latest events likely to shape that conversation, but Carney also has some relationship building to do. Things have been tense with Mexico as they have pursued their own paths, respectively, with the Trump administration. But now they have a bit of common cause of, frankly, perhaps being jerked around a bit, not even sure sort of how to negotiate their way out from under all of this and what that means in the context of their North American trading relationships.
So, Janice, with this early departure for Donald Trump, the schedule and the plans for this last day of the summit are upended. Lay out what's ahead now as things stand.
Yeah, that's right. So prior to all of this, Canadian officials did intend the headline to be today an announcement of exactly how Canada's new support for Ukraine was going to work. There's an additional $2 billion worth of support rolling out as part of Canada's increased defense spending this year. Key bilateral talks with the head of NATO, the Ukrainian president, who is here, meeting with G7 leaders this morning. That was supposed to be the story of the day. Of course, now Donald Trump is gone. That conversation changes. Trump, of course, yesterday musing that he thinks Russia should be part of this group. Obviously, the other leaders have a very different perspective on that. And then we move on to these expanded talks, the 2 hours scheduled this afternoon on energy security that people have flown in from India, Australia, South Africa, Brazil to join. Again, why fly in for those 2 hours? Well, it was probably because they wanted FaceTime with Donald Trump, who was to have been in that room, won't be now, specifically about Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, about whom there have been so many concerns expressed about him even being here, so many protests specifically about him being here. Important to note, this summit was supposed to be focusing on things like transnational repression, foreign interference. How does that play into the bilateral conversation Mark Carney scheduled to have with Modi? I should note, very late in the day, after reporters will have a chance to question the Prime Minister, I should add. So whatever is said behind those closed doors may be difficult to ascertain, but certainly a lot of concern by domestic stakeholders here in Canada about exactly what might be said.
Janice, thank you, and thanks for this morning. We'll be following your coverage out of Banff and Kananaskis through the day here on CBC News Network.